Hey everyone, I'm Belle Reid and welcome back to another video. So Empress Effects recently sent me a ZOIA Euroburo to check out. So for this video today, I wanted to share some initial patching ideas and sounds that I've discovered working with the Euroburo for the last couple of weeks. Okay, so first I want to talk briefly about what the ZOIA Euroburo is. ZOIA is a super customizable device made by Empress Effects that's available in both pedal and Eurorack module format. The Eurorack version is referred to as the Euroburo, which is what I'm talking about today. The ZOIA can act as a synthesizer, an effects processor, and a whole lot more. We'll take a look at some examples and demos to explore more of its capabilities in just a few minutes. The workflow between the pedal and the Eurorack module are super similar, so most of what I'm showing today will work on either version. The biggest difference between the two is that the Euroburo has 4 assignable CV inputs and 4 assignable CV outputs. That will come in handy in some of our patches, but it's not part of all of them. At this point, the ZOIA has been around for a while, so there are a lot of really great videos out there that can get you deep into the nuts and bolts of how it all works. So today, I'm just going to do a quick high-level overview of how the Euroburo works, and then we will jump straight into some patching. Okay, so in a nutshell, here's how it works. So over here, you have your display screen and some navigation and basic utility buttons. Then over on the right, we have audio inputs, audio outputs, headphone output, MIDI inputs and outputs. Along the bottom are control voltage inputs and outputs. Then there are a couple of assignable buttons here. And then this big grid area of buttons is where most of the patching takes place. So whenever you press a button on this grid, you notice that this screen here shows a new menu and it prompts you to select a module. So in a sense, the Euroburo is sort of like a virtual modular synthesizer or a virtual pedal board, and it has a huge collection of virtual modules that you can combine in any way. Broadly speaking, all of the internal modules are broken down into 5 categories. So the first category is interface modules. These are ways of communicating between the Euroburo and the external world. So this category contains things like audio inputs and outputs, MIDI inputs and outputs, and so on. The next category is audio modules. So these are all of your typical sound generators, noise generators, filters, VCAs, mixers, and so on. All of the typical sound generators and sound processors that you would find in a modular system or a synthesizer. There are also a couple of slightly more novel modules here in this category, like a granular processor, a pitch shifter, there is a diffuser, a bit modulator, an aliaser, and some other cool things. The next category is our control modules. So this category contains all of the typical control voltage tools that you would commonly find in a synthesizer, like envelopes, LFOs, sample and holds, random generators, sequencers, and plenty more. The next category is analysis modules. And this is something that I'm personally really excited about because although it's a small category, it has an onset detector, an envelope follower, and a pitch detector inside of it. And these are all really great tools for integrating acoustic or external instruments into modular synth patches, which is something that I love to do with my trumpet. So I'm definitely excited to share more about these modules later on. And finally, we have effect modules. I'll take a minute here just to pause and say that the effect sounds that are built into the Euroburo are really good. There are lots of reverbs, delays, different modulation effects, and a lot of algorithms that are borrowed from Empress's other pedal designs. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff, and I'm sure your gears are already turning and you're starting to think that you can clearly do a whole lot with this module. So let's take a quick look at how patching some of these things up works, and then we'll dive into the deep end. So to add a new module, as we've seen, you just click on any of the squares in the grid, scroll to the category that you want to add. I'm going to just go into audio modules and add just a basic oscillator to get started. Now, before you add that module onto the grid, you have some options you can choose from. So you can, rename it, change the color, and you can also set some basic parameters like the waveform. So I'm going to change this from sine to about a saw wave, and I'll come back up here and press done, and that will add the oscillator to the grid. So when you add a new module, the number of illuminated squares that you see here represents the number of inputs, outputs, and other variable parameters that you have access to within the module. You can click on them, and that allows you to manipulate them or to bring up some other options. And it also allows you to make connections between the module that you have and other areas within the Euroburo. So let's say that we wanted to run this oscillator into a filter, for example. So I'm going to click here next to it. I'll grab a filter. We have our low pass output turned on. That sounds great. So I'll go ahead and put that there. And now as I click on each of these different buttons, you can see there's our audio input for the filter. Then the next option is the cutoff frequency of the filter, the resonance, and there's our audio output. So if we wanted to run this oscillator into our filter, we would just press on the output and then press and hold and click on the input of the filter. And now those two modules are patched together. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and add maybe a reverb. So let's grab, we'll go into effects modules and I'll choose a hall reverb, and I'll take the output from my filter and I will patch that into the left and right inputs of my reverb. All right, so that's cool. Let's say now that we wanted to just add something to modulate some aspect of this patch, like the cutoff of our filter. So I'll go into the control modules area, grab maybe an LFO. I'm going to scroll down. It defaults to square wave, so I'll turn this over to, how about a sine wave? Go ahead and add that there. You can see it's already cycling, and I will patch that to control the cutoff frequency of the filter. And after you make a connection like this here, you can adjust the modulation depth by turning this up or down to determine how much influence that will have. All right, cool. So now that we have the lay of the land and we know how the basic patching workflow works on the Euroburo, I want to share a handful of patching ideas that I've come across over the last couple of weeks. I'm still getting to know this instrument, so as I've been trying out ideas, I've been thinking about things I'm excited to try as falling into 4 basic categories. First is using the Euroburo as a self-contained synth. Second is using it as an effect processor for external sounds. Third is using the Euroburo as a control voltage generator for a modular system. And finally, using the Euroburo as a generator and or mangler of MIDI data. Okay, so let's start off with something super simple. So I have a sine wave oscillator here running into a VCA. There's an envelope that I am using to shape the VCA, and that's being triggered by an LFO. And the same LFO is advancing 2 sequencers. One of them is 3 steps long, and the second is 4 steps long. And the 2 mixers are getting mixed together, and their sum is what's controlling the oscillator's pitch. I'm running all of that into a ghost verb here at the end. So the result of mixing these 2 sequencers together is that you get a 12-step pattern that kind of emerges as a result of the staggered cycling of the 2 sequencers. So even honing in on a single step of one of these sequences and changing the note can really change the pattern quite drastically. Okay, so here's a new patch. This is somewhat similar to the one we just looked at. I have a sequence running here on the Euroburo and a second voice on the Euroburo as well. And that second voice is being triggered and controlled by the zero control. So I'm just taking a single row output from the zero control and using that control voltage to control the oscillator's frequency of the second voice. And I'm also using the touch gate output here from the zero control. And that way I'm able to use this as a keyboard while the other sequence is running. Awesome. So these are some pretty beautiful examples of what the Euroburo can do. And a lot of the music that I've heard made with this module really leans into these lush, big reverbs, clean sounds, and generally just awesome, gorgeous sounding sound worlds. And while the ZOIA is really, really great at creating those kinds of sounds, when I first got this, I was super interested to see how far I could perhaps push it in the other direction to create some slightly more noisy, chaotic, and abrasive textures. So I did discover that there are a lot of modules within the Euroburo that lean toward making intense digital sounds, like there's a bit modulator, a bit crusher, an aliaser, fuzz, and distortion modules. And these can all make really intense sounds. But one other pretty interesting way that I've been enjoying coaxing out some aliasing from the system is by using feedback within pitch shifters. So let's take a quick look at that in action. So I'm going to start with a basic sine oscillator. I'm going to make sure that the FM modulation input on this is turned on. Then I'm going to grab a pitch shifter, drop that in there. I'll run my oscillator into the pitch shifter. And then I'm going to take the output of the pitch shifter and I'm going to run it back into the FM input on the oscillator, creating a feedback loop. Now, in terms of monitoring this, you could really choose any outputs, but I'm going to try taking the output from my oscillator and running that into my left output. And I'll take the output from the pitch shifter and run it into the right. Okay, let's take a listen to how this sounds. Okay, cool. So that's pretty harsh and crazy sounding. I've turned this really simple sine wave oscillator into a big, cascading mess of noise. So here I'm going to show you a few more patches that use this idea along with some other modules so that you can hear a little more of what's possible within this technique. Another thing I was really excited to try is running my trumpet into the ZOIA Euroburo to put some effects on it and process it. So to get my trumpet into my modular system, I have this mic, which is running into this preamp module. I'm using a Dope 119, but any preamp module would do the trick. And then I'm taking the audio output here and I'm running that into the audio input on the Euroburo. So I'm just going to start off with a basic patch here that applies a little bit of delay to the trumpet. So here I have my delay. I'm running my external audio signal into the delay line. I'm also using the built-in envelope follower module in the Euroburo, and I'm running my trumpet into that as well. I'm going to use the output from the envelope follower to modulate the delay time. So here's another simple processing patch where I'm running the trumpet into the Euroburo and processing it with a couple of diffuser modules. So the diffusers are a kind of crazy sounding modulatable slapback delay processor. So one thing that I really like about using the Euroburo as an effects processor for acoustic instruments is that you have a lot of very specific control over how you want to modulate basically every parameter within your processing modules. And this is a little bit harder to achieve this same level of nuanced control using typical guitar effects pedals, for example. So in this patch here, I am using a bunch of random voltage generators, and I am randomly modulating a number of different parameters within the two diffusers, and I am doing that modulation at random time intervals. So for this last patch in this category, I'm combining some analysis modules in the Euroburo with some sound processing and sound generation together. So I'm running my trumpet into a delay line on the Euroburo, which is then running into a pitch tracker and an envelope follower, which are each controlling different parameters of a noisy FM synth voice. So whenever I play my trumpet, the synth is going to copy me in a kind of wonky way a couple of seconds after I play. And I'm also applying some different effects onto both the trumpet and the internal synth voice in the Euroburo in order to sort of mesh these two sound worlds together. So generally, I'm a big fan of small portable modular systems that I can use for live performances. One of the biggest challenges with this is that sometimes it's difficult to have a sufficient number of control voltage sources within a small setup to be able to get from one musical idea to the next very easily. So often when I'm performing, I'll take a small system like this one with an Expert Sleepers ES8, and I'll do a lot of my control voltage generation from within my computer as a sort of workaround to this. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about the Euroburo is that it has these 4 assignable CV outputs, in addition to all of the internal control generation that we've already seen. And these outputs can come from anywhere within your patch. So for example, this module could generate 4 LFOs or 4 sequences, 4 random voltages, or any combination of things. One idea that I wanted to try was to set up 4 different patches on the Euroburo where it's only generating control voltage, and then to use that control voltage with the same physical patch on the rest of my modular system to see if switching between the different presets could get me to significantly different sound worlds without needing to physically repatch or change the routing in the rest of the system. So I've set up 4 different control voltage patches here on the Euroburo, and I'm going to try this out with the ZLOB modular F3DB. This module is a fixed filter bank, feedback, and distortion module, and I've made another video about this recently. I'll leave a link to that in the description of this video if you want to learn more about it. Okay, cool. So that's actually pretty interesting. This filter bank is an analog module, and by doing this, I've been able to use the Euroburo to create a kind of preset memory for how it should behave, which I could definitely see being super helpful in a live performance setting. So just out of curiosity, I want to try these same 4 control voltage patches with a different module or two as the sound source to see what happens. So I'll patch it up again. Sick. All right, awesome. So I also wanted to try some similar ideas where I'm generating control voltage from the Euroburo, but I'm also using it as an effect processor simultaneously. So here are a couple examples of that. So one last type of workflow that I was curious to try out was interfacing the Euroburo with other MIDI capable devices. So this has MIDI input and output, and it has a lot of different interface modules for dealing with different types of MIDI data. Now, one thing that struck me as interesting about this is that it seemed like it might allow you to manipulate or process the MIDI data in the same way that you can typically manipulate control voltage within a modular synth. So before we get too deep into this, I want to show you a simple example of what you can do with this. So this example is actually really similar to something I showed you earlier in this video, where I'm using 2 sequencers that have different lengths in order to control the same sound source. Now, the difference here is that I'm using the sequencers to control the Hydrasynth Explorer rather than an oscillator that is inside of the Euroburo. So everything you're hearing here is coming from the Hydrasynth, but it's being controlled via MIDI from the Euroburo. So since the Hydrasynth doesn't have a built-in sequencer of its own, this is a pretty cool way to expand its functionality. Okay, so there's actually another layer to this patch here as well. I've turned off local control on this Hydrasynth, so the keyboard isn't directly controlling its built-in sound engine. I'm sending the MIDI out from the keyboard itself to the Euroburo, and then the Euroburo is producing the sequence that we're hearing all by itself. But then I'm mixing the keyboard's MIDI note output with the sequence that's being generated on the Euroburo before sending all of that back out from the Euroburo into the Hydrasynth. So whenever I press a key here on the Hydrosynth, it'll act as an offset that will transpose the sequence that we're hearing from the Euroburo. Now this might seem a little bit weird, but basically what's happening is that I've effectively inserted the Euroburo between the Hydrosynth's keyboard and the Hydrosynth's sound engine, which gives me a way of taking whatever I'm playing on the keyboard, altering it within the Euroburo, and then sending that altered data back out from the Euroburo to control the Hydrosynth sounds. All right, awesome. So we've taken a look at a number of different ways to use the Euroburo as a self-contained synthesizer, as a processor for external sounds and external inputs, as a control voltage generator, as a MIDI Mangler and MIDI generator. And we've seen along the way that you can combine all of these various tools and techniques together in virtually any way that you want to. So I don't know about you, but my head is certainly spinning with all of the different things that we can explore and all of the possibilities with this module. Now, I will say that there's definitely a learning curve associated with working with this module, especially if you're newer to how synthesizers work and how synthesis and signal flow work in general. That said, it sounds great and it's a super powerful tool, so I think taking the time to really sit with it and learn what each of the modules inside of it does will really pay off. For me personally, I think that the effect processing capabilities and the control voltage kind of preset storage ideas that we were exploring earlier are the most exciting aspects of this module. I do a lot of live performance where I am working with a modular system that I need to be quite small, and also with my trumpet or other external instruments. And this is a really great way to expand both the sound capabilities and the control generation capabilities while keeping the overall footprint of my live setup relatively small. Now, of course, there is so much more that this module can do that I didn't cover in this video. I feel like in a big way, I have only just scratched the surface of what is possible. But this is a sampling of some of the things that I've been finding most creatively inspiring over my first couple of weeks with the Euroburo. You can pick up a ZOIA directly from the Empress Effects website, which I will leave a link to in the description below this video. And also in the description, I'll leave a number of affiliate links to everything that I used in this video. And anything that you buy with those affiliate links helps to support this channel so I can continue making more videos like this one. And if you try out a Euroburo and you find some other cool patching ideas and workflows, I would love to hear about them in the comments so that I can continue to learn more about this instrument and dive deeper into it. As always, thank you all so much for listening and for watching. I'll see you next time.